This is Jacqueline White of the Fannin County Historical Commission. Today I'm going to be talking to Mrs. Lois Arledge. Lois.
This is Lois Arledge, and I live in Bonham, Texas right now. And I want to tell you about my 90th birthday party. This was in July of this year, and my children, Bob and Sarah Arledge, planned a family reunion, and it was held at Lake Fork, which is about, not very far, but south and east of Sulphur Springs. And we were there 2 nights, and I didn't know that I had very many relatives, but we had 19 people there and 2 that didn't make it. So I have a lot of family, don't I? And it was a lovely weekend. It really was. The accommodations couldn't have been nicer, and the weather was just perfect. So I enjoyed being 90, and I recommend that to all of you. Now let's move way, way, way back to August 31st, 1919. I was born the 4th and the last child of Robert Earl Gray and Mary Elma Love Gray. And they named me Margaret Lois Gray. Since I was the 4th child, I'm sure that the other children, there was 2 brothers and a sister, would have been just as happy if I hadn't come along, but I did. And I don't remember very much about the early years, but I started to school at age 6, and I guess that was in 1926. 7 was the starting time, but apparently I was so tall and there wasn't anybody to play with, and they paid tuition for me to go to school early. Now the Dodge City School was at the far north edge of Dodge City. It was a square brick 2-story building, and it was from the 1st grade through the 10th. That was the deal at that time. And so I knew my 1st grade teacher. Her name was Mrs. Roy Morris, and her first name was Bernice, and we got along famously the whole time. I'm trying to think anything else about the school. It was really a nice school in the far edge of Dodge City to the north, and we lived in the very edge of Dodge City to the south. I lived on a farm, and our house was the last house in the city limits. I don't know how far that was, but it was a good distance, and I walked back and forth for lunch and in the afternoon too. And in those days, I don't know whether my daddy was different than anybody else. We had a car in the garage, but it never was out to take anybody to school. You walked every day, back and forth. Now let me tell you a little bit about Dodge City at that time. I'm talking in the, I remember it from the mid-20s to the end of the 30s. It really had everything that you needed. On the west side of the main street, the first building was run by Tobe Johnson. He was a black man that everybody just loved. He ran a press shop, and he made as far as I know, all the men's suits. They went to Tobe to get their suits made. The next building was Mr. Tom Vanoy's drugstore, and you could get just about anything you needed there. The next building was Uncle Frank Smith's grocery store. It was small, but he was a nice fella, and everybody enjoyed Uncle Frank. And then, if I remember correctly, the next building was Biggs and Farr dry goods store, and it was big. It had just about everything that you'd want in the way of dry goods. I know my mother, bless her heart, she was a fine farmer's wife. She did all the sewing. She made every bit of clothes that I had, and my sister too, and we bought material at Biggs and Farr. Across the street there was the bank, and I'm not sure what it was called, because when the Depression hit, it was bought out, I believe, by Bonham State Bank here in Bonham. But anyway, we had a bank, and the banker was Walter McGee, really a nice guy. And the next store was Tom Harridge's soda shop. It was fun to go in there when he got ice cream. It was really good. And then the next store was Gray and Love's grocery store. It was big, and that was both my uncles that ran that store forever. The next shop was the post office. And the next shop was Mr. Sam McGee's hardware store. And that takes care of the west side of Dodge City. Now on the east side, there was a grocery store. It belonged to Mr. Jim Culbreth, and I don't remember whether it stayed there very long or not. Probably not very long. But some interesting things on that side. For a while, we had a picture show. And of course, it was black and white, and it was no sound, and you had to just read the captions underneath. And I got to go once in a while, and Miss Otha Rayburn, Mr. and Mrs. Jim Rayburn, he was a brother to Mr. Sam Rayburn, lived the first house just out off of the street there in town. And Miss Otha was the loveliest lady, and she played the piano. If you've ever been to that kind of a picture show, you'll know what I'm talking about. The piano was pushed to the left side of the screen, and there was a light on the top of the piano with a green shade over it. I can just see it. And apparently they supplied her with the music, because when the cowboys were running real fast, she was really playing that piano fast. I can just hear her right now. And my favorite movie star was Fred Thompson and his horse named Silver King. Then for a while, there was a dance hall there in Dodge City, and it was pretty controversial. I was too young to go to the dance hall, thank goodness, but the scuttlebutt was that some of the young ladies got put out of the church for going. I never did hear that any of the fellas had any problem at all. I think that's interesting too.
Yeah.
We had a doctor, Dr. Donaldson, had a nice office then across the street from what would have been the dance hall, and we had a barber shop, and let's see, we had the Church of Christ was to the north, before we got to the school, and the Baptist church and the Methodist church were the east part of the one across the street from the other, and the Presbyterian church, I believe it was it's not in force now.
Cumberland?
Yes, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, that's what it was. It was pretty. It was a brick building and real pretty, and it was in force when I was growing up. And let's see, we had 2 blacksmith shops. We had 2 cotton gins, because cotton was the thing there. And I remember hearing this when the Depression came along. There was a saying that said 10-cent cotton and 40-cent meat. How in the world can a poor man eat?
Goodness.
Well, it was bad. It really was. And then another thing that I remember when, I guess it was 1928 when there was presidential election. I'm not sure that I have the years right on that. But Herbert Hoover was the Republican nominee, and Al Smith was the Democrat. And my mother said, I am not about to vote for Al Smith. And my dad says, I am not about to vote for Herbert Hoover. They voted, each to his own way. And I'll tell you, my dad never let my mother forget, because Herbert Hoover got blamed for the Depression, which of course that's politics.
Yeah.
So I remember the bad times and the good times. We didn't have any money, but I don't think anybody else did. We had a lot of good food, and we had nice clothes because my mother made them, and she raised turkeys to sell at Thanksgiving and Christmas time, and that was evidently a good thing. She chased them all up and down the farm, but when the time came, they came to town. The turkeys would just go right downtown. Yeah, they did. but that's how she got the money to make our clothes and whatever. So that was life until, well, all through that period of time. Now then, school was, I don't, it was like anybody else's school, I'm sure. It was a good school, and we got a good education there. And when the 10th grade was over, I was graduated. I got a scholarship to what was then East Texas. I think they called it a normal school. It wasn't as well thought of as it is today. And then I got a scholarship to Drawn's Business College. But of course there was no money for me to go anywhere, so I didn't get to go either place. But, and I stayed home there for the next year, and then they did send me to a little business school over in Bonham, run by Ms. Frances Ruark. I already had typing in high school. I took business English and shorthand. So, and this is something I'm kind of proud of, and I should be, but you know, I never had to apply for a job in my life. I worked forever, but one thing just led to another. I was working, then we had these projects that the government had started because of the Depression. And apparently the farm industry had a big project going, and all I remember it being called was something about the farmers and chains measuring. And they just begged people to come to work for the county agent, and that was, his name was V.J. Young, I believe that was who that county agent was right there. So while I was in school, I worked there from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until midnight, and I drove home to Dodge City by myself, and I have an idea that my folks were sound asleep when I got home. And when I think about that now, I almost have a rigor.
Yeah.
So while when I was still doing that, Herbert Burrow was the president and manager of the Bonham Cotton Mill, and that was a real good industry in Bonham at that time. They hired over 300 employees, and they ran 3 shifts. So Herbert called Frances Ruark and asked for the name of somebody she would recommend. They needed somebody in the office, and so I got that, and I worked there 7 years. And Robert was working there in the cloth room in the shipping part, Robert Arledge, and I was in the office, and Robert had to come in real often. He just had more business in the office than anything. And so in 1940, we got married, and in due time, I quit, and we had a son. But let's me back up now. After, I can't think of anybody particularly that you would remember now that worked in the cotton mill, but that and the Southwest Pump Company were the real industries in Bonham. Later, the General Cable came, but I think it was much later. But let's talk a little bit about the CCC camp, and of course the WPA was going, and I don't know what some of them were called, but the CCC, I'm assuming, was the Civil Conservation Corps, something like that. And I don't know if you will remember, but they built the state park. They built the auditorium that Bonham uses now, the high school auditorium. They built that. But the state park was really interesting. A cousin of mine had graduated from Texas A&M. His name is Harvey Joe Williams, and he was a civil engineer. And of course there was no jobs at that time, and so evidently he was in charge of at least the CCC that was building the Bonham State Park, because that rock building that's out there right now is one of his affairs. Well, they were digging the pool out. This was probably 1935, because in 36 the building was finished and all that concrete and all that was finished, and the lake was probably half full or better. The reason I remember that so well, that was the year I graduated from high school. And somebody had given me a red bathing suit that was something else. Well, my mother had always said, don't go in the water until you learn how to swim. So I went with my graduating class. We all went out there, and maybe some of the others from school, but I went in the water, but I didn't get wet. I could just wade pretty good, but that was good times. That was good times. And I'm not sure where that camp was located, but I have the feeling it was somewhere about where Kids Castle is, and that restaurant right in there. I think that's where it was. And those fellas lived there. I think they stayed there all the time, and I think they did a good job. And of course, that was providing jobs for fellas that couldn't get anything to do. The Depression was so. Let's stop right now. I'm trying to think what.
Ready to turn it on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
During that period in the mid-30s, and while the works projects were going on in Fannin County as a stimulus package, I'm assuming, they also built the Lake Fannin, and that was quite a place. I don't know how many cabins they had, but lots of them, and then a main lodge, and then a building for the caretakers. And I've been down there to spend the night lots of times, and to parties in the lodge, and it was really nice. And then later on, after it was not working very good, but my husband would take Bob down there fishing. There was a nice lake, and I believe this was before my time, that a lot of the Bonham kids went down there to go swimming and into parties down there. So I'm glad that it has been restored. I haven't seen it, but I know that it's really nice. And I went down there after a long time. There was a party in the lodge, and a lot of people that I remembered, we went down there. It was a kind of a dance and just a good thing, and it was fun.
A fun place.
It was a fun place. Yes,
Yeah.
it was. So let's see, where are we here? So I worked, talking about my jobs, I worked at the cotton mill for 7 years and quit to give birth to Robert Gray Arledge. That's the only child that we had. And so I didn't go back to work down there anymore, except they'd ask me to come for vacation sometimes. And I stayed home with Bob until he was about ready for school. Robert's dad was Paul Arledge Sr., and he was working at the tax office, and it was in the courthouse at that time, and they collected taxes for everybody. So at that, I don't know what year that was, but in the mid-40s, I'm thinking somewhere about then, he was elected to start the school tax office outside of the other. So he had a little office. It was in a little building on Center Street there, next door, I think, to where the fire department was at that time. It was about to fall down, but anyway, that's where he went. And he would go out he had to go all over Fannin County to set up the books. And when it came time to type all that up and get it ready to send out statements, I took that over, and we worked really good there for a long time. And so several years later, I'm not sure just when this was, I was in Mr. Arledge's office, and Mr. Lawrence Denton, who was an elder of the First Christian Church here in Bonham, came in and he said, "Lois, I'd sure like for you to come and start an office in the church. We really need that." And so consequently, I did. And the pastor at that time was Paul Campbell, and we worked together until he resigned. And Catherine, his wife, was the children's worker for the state of Texas, and that was in Fort Worth, but she lived in Bonham, and so I began to take care of her business in her home there. She and her mother and the Campbells lived on 5th Street, where Phyllis Gottforth lives right now. So that was a neat thing, and I traveled with Miss Campbell a good bit because she had schools all over the state of Texas teaching children's workers. And sometimes it might be that I was making tuna salad to serve the people, and it could be that I was doing something else. But anyway, that was kind of a fun time for me. So I worked there in the First Christian Church for 18 years. And one day, Mr. Alvin Gross, who was the manager for the M&S clinic and hospital, came over to the church and he said, "Lois, I'd like for you to come and work in the office there for the doctors. We need somebody." And of course that was full time. I was only working part time at the church, so I went and kept books for 5 doctors, and the hospital closed during that time, and the main office for that was closed down. Those girls, there was Joe Bowen and Betty Brent and Donna Ruark were working in there, and of course they all left, but I stayed for 12 years. And doctors came and went. Dr. Biggers and Dr. Morgan and Dr. Stevens and Dr. Williams and Dr. Sisk were the 5 doctors that were there when I first went. Dr. Biggers died and Dr. Stevens died, and we had Dr. Hill that came in for a time, and we had Dr. Boer that was there for a time, and it was good. It was good. They were good years. And so somewhere in the 70s, early 70s, Dr. Sisk took a month off, and he had a doctor that came from Dallas to take over for him for that time, and his name was Pedro Cruz. He was from, I'm going to tell you in a minute where he was from. Oh. Anyway, he was there for a month working in Dr. Sisk's office and decided he wanted to stay. So he and his wife moved to Bonham, and he was there in the office. He was a nice general practitioner. Well, one day here came another doctor that was a friend of Dr. Cruz. That was Dr. Lopez, Rene Lopez. Now, he was a surgeon, and they were all from San Salvador. That's where they were from, and they had been in the States and did their residency and whatever they had to prove that they were capable. So the upshot of that was that Dr. Cruz and Dr. Lopez built a clinic down across the street from the hospital, which is still standing, and I'm not sure what all is in there, but there's something in that building there. And so they put it me to go down and get them started. And during that time, my husband died, and so he said, "I wish you'd go with them when we go." So I did. And they were there 6 years, and they were very happy years. And Dr. Lopez left first, and he went out in West Texas. Dr. Cruz then left and went into Plano, and he still practices in South Bonham. But anyway, Dr. Cruz said, "I want you to go with us over there." Well, it worked out that I didn't move over there, but I went, and I would stay the nights at their house and go with him every day. Was teaching them to do Medicare. That was the new thing right then. And I did that for a number of years, and I would drive back home from Plano after dark and never did have any problems. The good Lord was certainly with me.
Yes,
anyway, so when they closed that building, and I decided that I had done all I needed to do for the cruises, I just came home and did nothing for a while. Well, at that time, Edward Jones had come into Bonham, and the man that was managing it is now with Raymond James. That's Dan Hale. And he and O.M. Weaver were in the Kiwanis together, and it met at the Christian church. So O.M. mentioned to Dan Hale that I would be able to help him get the office started. So they called me, and I went, and I worked for Edward Jones for several years. I don't know, not many. And anyway, he moved the office. Well, no, he was moved to Paris, and that was the end of that. But then when he came back with Raymond James, he bought that house where he is now.
Oh.
But I was not working for him then. So I also worked for during tax season for Stan Norwood. This was about that same time. And one day, Stan Norwood came by my house and he said, can you come and help us? And what I did was copy all those income tax returns and assemble them and do all that stuff. It was neat. I went to work there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I guess I was still working at Edward Jones then. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon and stayed until 7 or 8. It was, it was just the copy and stuff. But that was good, and I'm still a good friend of Beth's. So I was, we're up to 1990 right now, and I was not working. And of course, I was getting up in years anyway. And one day, Bill Hogue came by my house. He was chairman of the board at the First Christian Church. Lois, we need you to come back to the church. So Gary Gibbs had just come to Bonham as the pastor. I went back and stayed another 12 years and retired, I think, about 2003. And I haven't done anything since.
Oh my goodness, you've been a busy lady.
Now then, where?
I just have to always hit record to get you going.
I'm ready. I needed to add a little bit about my days in Dodge City. And this you'll find interesting because one of the highlights of the week when you lived in Dodge City was to come to Bonham on Saturday night to the picture show. And Saturday night in Bonham during that time was really something. There was a store in every one of those buildings clear around the square, and some of them off the square. And people came to Bonham on Saturday afternoon and Saturday night. They did their shopping. They walked around and around the square. You can't imagine that many people in Bonham, Texas. And this was in the 30s because I was not married then. And Mr. Walter McGee that I mentioned was the banker. He and his wife, Miss Lula, loved to go to the picture show. And at that time, there was 3 movies houses in Bonham. There was the Best, and then there was the American, and then I'm not sure, seemed like the other one was called the Elite. It was on the west side of the square. The Best was on the south, and the American Theater was down Main Street just off the square. Of course, it was the Best. It had a balcony, and that's where the black people could go. They couldn't buy their tickets at the front, but they had a place for them to buy their tickets, and they would go up in the balcony. And I've talked to Cecil Jones. He's a good friend of mine, and he would tell about it, kind of laughed. He said that was the best seats in the house, and they didn't know that. But anyway, what I started to tell was about the picture shows on Saturday. If you got there by 9:30, you could go in and pay one fee and get to stay for the 10:30 show. And so that's what we did. You'd see probably better than half of the earlier movie, and then the 10:30 shows were really good. And one of Mr. McGee's favorite actresses was Kay Francis. And he would get in touch with us girls there, he and Miss Lula, and say, I think Kay's on tonight, let's go to the movies. And that was one of the highlights of living in Dodge City, was we had everything we needed, but it was fun to come to Bonham.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. I need to tell you about my son. Robert Gray Arledge was born July the 29th, 1945. He was a little old tiny thing, just weighed 5 pounds, and now he's 6 feet and probably weighs 225 pounds. But anyway, he's the joy of my life, really. And I spoke about working some of that time. I'm not sure what it was, but Bob didn't want to go to kindergarten. And I tried and tried, but he wouldn't go. And then he didn't want to go to school that first year either. He cried every morning. And Miss Culpepper, Fanny Culpepper, she was ready to retire, and she was kind of scary. And that's who he got for his teacher. And so every morning it was getting Bob in there, and he'd be having tears rolling down his cheeks. So finally I took him to Sherman to the pediatrician that I had used, and he gave me some sort of medication that helped. And I remember him saying, now don't let him go trick-or-treating on Halloween. Anyway, we got through that, and then we got through the second grade, and by the third grade, Bob was going good. He liked his teacher. Her name was Moore, and she lived at Ravenna, and she was really neat person. And from then on, he did really good. We learned years afterward that we didn't know until after Bob got through college that at that time he had dyslexia, but I guess he outgrew it because he did well in school, and he went to Texas A&M, and he and David Woodard went together. David Woodard and Gene Wilshire and Mike Sutherland, I believe he calls himself Edward these days, but he was Mike in those days, and they were at our house all the time. They had a good time, and some of the girls were Carolyn Campbell, and I'm trying to think some of them that graduated with him. But anyway, it was good. They graduated in 1963, I believe that's right. And then Bob went on to A&M and was in the Corps and had his head shaved and all of that good stuff. And so we went to lots of fairs, Robert and I did, while he was down there. And so then he met some girls, and he got real interested in these girls. And so the last one was named Sarah Davis, and she lived in Dallas, and he had come into Dallas for a football game with a bunch of the boys and met her. She was going with one of those boys. But anyway, Bob and Sarah married in 1968. That was the year that he graduated from A&M, and he graduated in May, I guess, or June, whatever, and they married that same weekend in Dallas, and they had a big wedding at Walnut Hill Methodist Church. And so and Bob had a job with it was an airplane plant, and they've sold so many times. I'm trying to think what it was, which one. Northrop Grumman is what it.
Okay.
Chance Vault, that was what it was called then. And he stayed on there. Well, he retired in 30 years, and it was Northrop Grumman then. But anyway, when they were first married, they lived in Irvine, had a little apartment there. And then they had been married 2 or 3 years, and then they had their first child. Amanda Susan, darling little girl, was born December the 26th. That was a harrowing Christmas, I'll tell you. And then the doctors told Sarah she wanted another child. She needed to do it right quick. So in October the 3rd of another whole year, Mary Catherine was born, and that's the only children that they have. So after Bob retired from Northrop then, he is now working for, they used to be Raytheon, but his part of it is called L3, and they build airplanes and do other things. They do that sort of work, and he has just finished working, and I'm not sure that they're through with it yet, a plane for South Korea. He's been to South Korea, and they had a test flight a Saturday a week ago, and he said, "Oh, it was wonderful, Mother." They flew to Florida somewhere, and they were there for about 2 hours and then flew back. So he is involved with that, and they still live in Dallas, and he drives to Greenville every day, and he calls me on the way home every day, and that's what keeps me going. Now the daughters were in private school, they went to a private school until they were ready for high school, and they should have stayed there, because going into the high school in Dallas as a stranger they didn't have a very good time in high school. But they did all right. They played volleyball and they played soccer and they did this and that and the other, and they went to the Walnut Hill Methodist Church, and each of the girls would be an acolyte or whatever they call it in the Methodist Church to light the candles and all that. And I made a point to go to Dallas to church every time they were going to be there. So Amanda is the older one, and she married Marlon White in, let's see, in October of 1997, I believe. They've been married about that long. And they have two of the darlingest little boys. Mason is now 11, and he plays football, and he's just a doll. He likes to fish, and he likes to hunt, and he's going to do pretty good with football. And then they had Clayton Robert, and Clayton is different altogether. He is just darling. He's in the 3rd grade, and I believe he is playing soccer, although I'm not sure. Bob and Sarah try to go to their games, but the weather's been bad, and first one thing and then another. So anyway, they're really darling and good. You know, Amanda's done a good job raising those boys. And then Katie went to A&M to start with, and she didn't like it so good. I'm not sure what happened to Katie, but she dropped out. And then she went to Austin, but she wasn't in school right then. She was working at something. Then she decided to go out to, okay. So Katie, after a time, I'm not sure about how long, but she enrolled in San Marcos.
They're off, so get it on where she has.
Katie decided that she needed to go back to school, and so she went out to San Marcos, to Southwestern State, and she did really well, graduated summa cum laude, and we were so proud of her for that. Well, in the meantime, she met Matt Parker. Matt came from Beaumont, and I think that he was at school out there too. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, Katie and Matt were married they went to some of the islands. I've forgotten now what. Anyway, they just did their own thing, and they now live in Houston, and she works for American Express, and Matt is a drug detail salesman, and she's going to be having a birthday on Saturday, the 3rd of October, and they're going to be going, I think it's to Albuquerque. He has a business meeting, and she's going there too.
Oh.
So that takes care of, and they don't have any children. That takes care of my immediate family. We'll switch back now to 1940, when Robert and I were married on September the 20th in 1940. We married in my parents' home out at Dodge City. It was a 2-story house, and I remember getting all dressed up and coming down the stairs, and my dad was there waiting for me, and he said, "Quit shaking." So, but anyway, we got married, and Miss Dick Saunders played the piano, and Miss Pritchett sang "I Love You Truly," Mary Alice Pritchett. We didn't have a piano, so my dad moved the piano from the First Baptist Church in Dodge City in a wagon and put it in there, and we had music and everything, and we had a reception, and Robert was scared to death. He had hidden the car somewhere, and we thought, well, we did get tin canned, and we drove to Texarkana, and then we went to Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we ran out of money pretty soon, and we came back home. We were both working at the Bonham Cotton Mill at that time, and so we belonged to the Bonham Golf Club and the Dodo Club. That was a bridge and dinner club, and they're still meeting. I don't know that they play bridge anymore, but some of the members that were friends of ours were Pat and Dottie Clutter. They lived next door to us, and Barney and Mary Sue Gross, and Johnny and Opal Lane, and the Sutherlands, Ed and his wife. Well, I forget what her name was. Okay, the Ed Sutherlands belonged, and Of course, it was big. I'm missing somebody, but they were our closest friends. And we also had a little party once a month. We all got together in our homes, and we'd have kind of a progressive party. Somebody would have cocktails, and somebody would have salad, and somebody would have the main course. And we did that for a long time. And then, of course, at the church, I was a member of the Christian Women's Fellowship, and I had not joined the church until the early 50s. I was still a member of the Baptist Church in Dodge City, but when I was still working there, I joined the church early in the 50s, and I'm still there. So, and Robert, of course, and his family belonged there. The Paul Arledges were longtime members, and Paul's sister, Mamie and Bland Smith, and his brother John Arledge and Madeline. And at that time, the Christian church was full on Sundays. When I was first working in the office, I made at least 250 bulletins every week, and on special occasions, more. We don't have near that many anymore.
No.
So, and Robert continued to work at the cotton mill until it began to fail, and he knew that it was going under. And so that's one reason I switched from the church and went to the M&S clinic to work full time, and told him he just could quit and I would keep working until he found something, which he did. He went to work at the General Cable, and he started out working at night, but he's working in the daytime, but his health gave way and he retired in mid-70s, and then he died in 1980. I continued to live at the same place until a couple of years ago when I sold my house to the First Baptist Church and moved out into a duplex on Liberty Street, and I've made my home there, and it's good. And so I believe that this is about all I need to tell you today, and I appreciate being with Jacqueline White here, and with Tommy Thornton, and Barbara Biggerstaff has come in, so we've had a good reunion, and thank you very much for